Maria Rodriguez had always been a woman of grit and determination. Life hadn't handed her anything easy, but that was fine with her. She preferred to earn it herself anyway. Born into a family of modest means in a small Texas town, Maria grew up watching her father tinker with old trucks in their driveway. By the time she was 10, she could change a tire faster than most adults. But while other kids dreamed of becoming astronauts or doctors, Maria's heart belonged to the open road. There was something about the hum of engines, the endless stretch of asphalt ahead, and the freedom of moving forward that called to her soul. Her journey wasn't without its twists and turns, though. When she graduated high school, Maria decided to join the Army. It wasn't just patriotism that drove her. It was also the promise of discipline, structure, and adventure. During her time in the military, she served as a logistics specialist, ensuring supplies reached troops stationed in remote areas. Her role often put her behind the wheel of massive vehicles, driving through treacherous terrains under challenging conditions. She thrived on the responsibility, earning the respect of her peers for her sharp instincts and unshakable focus. But perhaps the greatest gift the Army gave Maria wasn't the skills she learned or the medals she earned. It was Max and Luna, two highly trained military working dogs assigned to her unit. Max, a muscular German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, and Luna, his sleek counterpart with a coat like midnight, were more than just tools of the trade. They became her partners, her protectors, and eventually, her friends. Together, they patrolled dangerous zones, sniffed out threats, and stood shoulder to shoulder in situations where trust meant everything. When Maria left the service after 8 years, she couldn't bear the thought of leaving Max and Luna behind. Through special arrangements, she adopted them, bringing them home to start a new chapter of their lives together. Life after the military wasn't exactly what Maria expected. Transitioning back to civilian life came with its own set of challenges, but Maria refused to let anything hold her back. She took her love for driving and turned it into a career, becoming a long-haul truck driver. The job suited her perfectly. It allowed her to be independent, see the country, and live life on her own terms. Plus, having Max and Luna along for the ride made every trip feel safer. Their presence in the cab was comforting, and knowing they were there gave her peace of mind when traveling through unfamiliar places late at night. On this particular evening, Maria found herself cruising down a lonely stretch of highway in the southwestern United States. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The desert landscape stretched endlessly around her, dotted with mesquite bushes and jagged rock formations. It was beautiful, in its own stark way, but Maria knew better than to let her guard down. These isolated roads could be unpredictable, especially once darkness fell. As she navigated the highway, Maria noticed a group of motorcyclists trailing behind her rig. At first glance, they seemed harmless enough, just a bunch of riders enjoying the open road. But their behavior quickly changed. Instead of maintaining a safe distance, they began riding aggressively, weaving dangerously close to her trailer. Some of them revved their engines loudly, clearly trying to get her attention. Maria tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her jaw setting into a firm line. She'd dealt with reckless drivers before, but there was something about these bikers that felt different. The harassment started subtly, a few honks here, some loud whoops there, but it didn't take long for things to escalate. One biker pulled alongside her cab, shouting insults through cupped hands. Another rode directly in front of her, deliberately slowing down to force her to brake repeatedly. Maria clenched her teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of reacting. She flicked on her hazard lights briefly, hoping they'd understand she needed space, but they only laughed and mimicked the gesture mockingly. Inside the cab, Max and Luna stirred. Trained to pick up on subtle changes in their handler's demeanor, they sensed Maria's rising tension. Max lifted his head, his ears perking up as he scanned the scene outside. Luna, ever vigilant, moved closer to Maria, pressing her warm body against her leg as if offering silent support. Maria glanced down at them, grateful for their companionship. "It's okay," she murmured softly, though she wasn't entirely sure whom she was trying to reassure, them or herself. Despite her best efforts to ignore the bikers, Their antics grew worse. They surrounded her truck, cutting off any chance of escape. One rider leaned precariously close to her window, pounding on the glass and yelling slurs designed to provoke her. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew engaging with them would only make the situation worse. Still, the weight of their hostility pressed down on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. The bikers' taunts grew louder, more personal. They mocked her for being a woman in what they considered a man's world, daring her to step out of the truck so they could teach her a lesson. Maria swallowed hard, her mind racing. She was outnumbered, far from help, and acutely aware of how vulnerable she was out here in the middle of nowhere. Yet even as fear prickled at the edges of her resolve, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She wasn't someone who backed down easily. Not in the army, not now, and certainly not to a gang of bullies hiding behind leather jackets and loud engines. Unbeknownst to the bikers, Maria had an ace up her sleeve, or rather two of them. Max and Luna sat quietly beside her, ready to spring into action at her command. For now, all Maria could do was keep driving and hope for an opportunity to turn the tables. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't go down without a fight. The harassment continued for what felt like hours, though in reality it was probably no more than 20 minutes. Each passing second weighed heavily on Maria as the bikers grew bolder and more aggressive. Their motorcycles roared like angry beasts, circling her rig with reckless abandon. One of them rode dangerously close to her trailer, leaning into the wind blast created by her massive truck. Another swerved directly in front of her, forcing her to slam on the brakes repeatedly. The sudden jolts sent Max and Luna scrambling for balance inside the cab, their claws scraping against the floor as they tried to steady themselves. Maria's knuckles turned white as she gripped the steering wheel tighter. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, trying to focus on maintaining control of her vehicle. But the constant noise, the revving engines, the shouting, the mocking laughter, was overwhelming. It wasn't just the physical danger that unnerved her. It was the sheer audacity of these men. They acted as if they owned the highway, treating her presence as an inconvenience or worse, an opportunity to assert dominance. At one point, a biker pulled alongside her passenger side window again, this time standing upright on his bike's foot pegs to get a better look inside the cab. He pointed at Max and Luna, who were now sitting alertly beside Maria, their bodies tense but controlled. "Look at those mutts," he hollered, his voice carrying over the din. "Think you're tough because you've got a couple of dogs? We'll show you how real men handle things." Maria didn't respond. She knew better than to engage with someone whose only goal was to provoke her. Instead, she reached down and rested a reassuring hand on Max's head. The gesture seemed to calm him slightly, though his sharp eyes remained locked on the chaos outside. Luna pressed closer to Maria's leg, her tail tucked tightly against her body, a sign that even she recognized the gravity of the situation. Despite their training, both dogs were clearly affected by the escalating tension. Still, they trusted Maria implicitly, waiting patiently for her signal before taking any action. As the miles dragged on, the bikers began playing a cruel game of cat and mouse. Whenever Maria attempted to change lanes or speed up to put some distance between herself and the group, they would block her path, forcing her back into place. It was infuriating and terrifying. With each failed attempt to escape, Maria felt her options dwindling. Her fuel gauge showed she still had plenty of diesel left, but she couldn't keep driving aimlessly forever. Eventually, she'd need to stop for rest, food, or bathroom breaks, and the thought of facing these men alone in a deserted area made her stomach churn. Then came the moment that confirmed Maria's worst fears. The bikers decided to take matters into their own hands. As they approached a narrow dirt road branching off from the main highway, several of them sped ahead, forming a makeshift blockade across both lanes. When Maria slowed down to assess the situation, another biker pulled up beside her driver's side window and gestured wildly for her to turn onto the dirt road. "Go that way," he shouted, pointing toward the desolate track. "We're letting you pass." Maria hesitated, her instincts screaming at her not to trust them. This detour looked Anything but innocent. The dirt road twisted away from the highway, disappearing into the barren landscape beyond. There were no streetlights, no signs of civilization, and certainly no cell phone reception out here. If she followed their instructions, she'd be completely isolated and entirely at their mercy. For a brief moment, Maria considered ignoring their demands and continuing straight down the highway. But the bikers quickly closed ranks around her truck, boxing her in so tightly that she had no choice but to comply. With a deep breath, she signaled her turn and guided her rig onto the dirt road, her tires kicking up clouds of dust as she went. Behind her, the bikers cheered triumphantly, their motorcycles rumbling like thunder as they trailed closely behind. The further Maria drove, the more uneasy she became. The dirt road was rough and uneven, jostling her truck violently with every bump. Inside the cab, Max and Luna struggled to stay seated, their ears pinned back in discomfort. Outside, the bikers maintained their relentless pace, flanking her vehicle on all sides. Occasionally, one of them would ride ahead, scanning the horizon as if searching for something, or someone. Maria's mind raced with possibilities, none of which ended well for her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the convoy came to a halt in a wide clearing surrounded by jagged cliffs and scattered boulders. The bikers spread out, forming a loose circle around Maria's truck. Their engines idled menacingly, filling the air with a low, guttural growl. Maria cut her engine and sat perfectly still, her heart hammering in her chest. She glanced at Max and Luna, silently willing them to stay calm. Whatever happened next, she needed them to remain focused and ready. One of the bikers dismounted and approached her driver's side window, his face obscured by a black bandana and mirrored sunglasses. He pounded on the glass with the heel of his hand, shouting for her to roll it down. Maria ignored him, keeping her gaze locked straight ahead. After a few moments, he stepped back and exchanged a few words with his companions, who responded with raucous laughter. Then, without warning, he swung open the passenger side door, causing Max and Luna to leap to their feet, hackles raised. "Hey, look at these monsters!" the biker exclaimed, stepping back instinctively as Max let out a low, menacing growl. Luna positioned herself protectively in front of Maria, her teeth bared in a silent warning. For a split second, the man froze, clearly unprepared for the sight of two highly trained military K9s staring him down. But then he laughed nervously, waving a dismissive hand. "Relax, lady. These are just pets. They won't do nothing." Maria didn't say a word. Instead, she placed her palm firmly on Max's head and gave him a single, quiet command. "Watch." The effect was immediate. Max's entire demeanor shifted. He went from alert to downright intimidating, his muscles coiled like springs as he prepared to act. Luna mirrored his stance, her piercing gaze never leaving the intruder. The biker took another step back, suddenly realizing he might have underestimated the situation. Inside the cab, Maria's mind was racing. She knew she couldn't rely solely on her dogs to defuse the situation. They were trained to protect, not negotiate. But she also knew that panic would only make things worse. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she reminded herself of everything she'd learned during her years in the military. Survival wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy, patience, and knowing when to strike. And as long as Max and Luna were by her side, she had a fighting chance. Outside, the tension was palpable. The other bikers had noticed the standoff and were watching intently, unsure of what to do next. Some of them muttered among themselves, while others simply stared, transfixed by the sight of the two imposing dogs guarding their handler. For the first time since the harassment began, Maria allowed herself a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn the situation around. The standoff in the clearing felt like it lasted an eternity, though in reality only a few tense seconds had passed. Maria sat motionless in her seat, her hand still resting on Max's head as she maintained eye contact with the biker who had opened her passenger side door. He was visibly shaken now, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of the two powerful dogs staring him down. Behind him, the rest of the bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering for the first time since they began harassing Maria. "Close the door," Maria finally said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. The biker hesitated, his eyes darting between Maria and the growling K9s. "I said close the door," she repeated, her tone leaving. No room for argument. Reluctantly, he stepped back and slammed the door shut, retreating to rejoin his group. But the confrontation was far from over. Now that they were surrounded in the isolated clearing, the bikers seemed determined to regain control of the situation. One of them shouted something unintelligible, prompting another to dismount and approach the truck again, this time from the rear. Maria watched him in her side mirrors, her pulse quickening. She knew what they wanted, to intimidate her into submission. They thought they could break her spirit, make her feel small and powerless. But they didn't know Maria. And they certainly didn't know Max and Luna. Inside the cab, Max and Luna were in full alert mode. Their training kicked in automatically, their bodies rigid with readiness. Maria gave them another subtle command: "Stay." The dogs obeyed instantly, their focus unwavering. She couldn't afford to let them loose yet, not until she was sure it was absolutely necessary. If things escalated further, she needed to be strategic about when and how her loyal companions entered the fray. The second biker circled around to Maria's driver's side window, pounding on the glass again. This time, however, there was less bravado in his actions. His movements were hurried, almost frantic, as if he sensed the tide turning against him. When Maria refused to roll down the window, he shouted louder, demanding she step out of the truck. "You think your little guard dogs can save you?" he sneered, trying to mask his fear with aggression. "We're not afraid of them." Maria allowed herself a faint smirk. These men clearly had no idea what they were dealing with. Max and Luna weren't ordinary pets. They were elite military working dogs, trained to respond to threats with precision and force. To anyone else, they might have looked like typical German shepherds, but their discipline, strength, and intelligence set them apart. Every bark, every growl, every movement was calculated. And right now they were itching to show these bikers exactly why crossing Maria Rodriguez was a mistake. The biker at the window continued yelling, growing increasingly agitated when Maria ignored him. Finally, he stepped back and signaled to his comrades. In unison, several of them dismounted their bikes and began closing in on the truck. Some carried makeshift weapons, chains, pipes, even a crowbar, and their body language made it clear they intended to escalate the situation. Maria's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay composed. Panicking would only cloud her judgment, and she needed to think clearly if she was going to get out of this alive. As the bikers moved closer, Maria cracked open the passenger side door just enough to give Max and Luna room to move. The moment the dogs caught sight of the opening, they sprang into action. Max bolted out first, his muscular frame moving with breathtaking speed and agility. Luna followed closely behind, her sleek form gliding effortlessly across the ground. The sudden appearance of the two snarling, highly trained K9s sent shockwaves through the group of bikers. One man instinctively raised his chain, intending to strike at Max as he approached. But before he could swing, Max pivoted sharply, dodging the blow with ease. In one fluid motion, he lunged forward, grabbing the man's wrist in his powerful jaws. The biker screamed in pain, dropping the chain as he stumbled backward. Max released, his grip just as quickly, retreating a few steps to reassess the threat. The message was clear: don't test him. Meanwhile, Luna zeroed in on another biker who had been advancing toward the truck with a crowbar. She circled him silently, her piercing gaze locked onto his every move. When he swung the weapon wildly, in an attempt to scare her off, Luna ducked under the arc of the blow and darted forward, sinking her teeth into the fabric of his pant leg. The man yelped and tried to shake her off, but Luna held firm, her grip unyielding. Only when he dropped the crowbar and raised his hands in surrender did she release him, backing away slightly but remaining poised to attack again if needed. The chaos unfolded rapidly, each moment more intense than the last. The bikers scrambled to retreat, tripping over each other in their panic. One of them tripped and fell flat on his back, landing mere inches away from Max, who loomed over him with a deep, menacing growl. The man froze, his face pale with terror, as he stared up at the dog towering above him. Max didn't need to bite or scratch. He simply stood there, radiating authority, daring the man to make a single wrong move. Maria stepped out of the cab now, her presence commanding despite her smaller stature. She walked around to the front of her truck, positioning herself between Max and Luna as they continued to corral the bikers. Her expression was steely, her voice cutting through the commotion like a blade. "Call them off," she ordered, gesturing to her dogs. The bikers froze, too terrified to argue. They had gone from predators to prey in the blink of an eye, and they knew it. For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the bikers and the low, steady growls emanating from Max and Luna. Then, slowly, the leader of the group raised his hands in surrender. Okay, he stammered, his voice trembling. Just call them off. We'll leave, all right? We'll leave." Maria studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception. Satisfied that he was genuinely scared, she issued a sharp command to her dogs. "Stand down." Max and Luna immediately relaxed their aggressive stances, though they remained vigilant, their eyes never leaving the bikers. Taking advantage of the reprieve, the men scrambled to their feet and began backing away, muttering apologies and promises to never bother Maria again. As the bikers mounted their bikes and sped off into the distance, leaving trails of dust in their wake, Maria exhaled deeply, her shoulders sagging with relief. She knelt beside Max and Luna, praising them softly as she ran her hands over their heads and backs. "Good job, my brave ones," she murmured, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved us." Despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, Maria knew the ordeal wasn't entirely over. She was still stranded in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the main highway. But for the first time since the harassment began, she felt safe. With Max and Luna by her side, she believed she could handle whatever came next. Slowly, she climbed back into her truck, started the engine and turned the vehicle around, heading back toward the paved road. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, casting the desert in shades of indigo and silver. As she drove, Maria reflected on the events of the evening, marveling at how quickly the tables had turned. Max and Luna settled back into their usual spots in the cab, their earlier intensity replaced by quiet contentment. Maria glanced at them fondly, feeling a surge of pride. These dogs weren't just her companions, they were her family, her protectors, and her proof that loyalty and courage could overcome even the toughest odds. And as the miles rolled by, beneath her tires, she knew one thing for certain. Life on the road might be unpredictable, but with Max and Luna riding shotgun, she was ready for anything. Maria's truck rumbled back onto the main highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness as she guided it toward safer ground. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins during the confrontation with the bikers was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a mix of exhaustion and relief. She glanced at Max and Luna, who were now lying down in their usual spots, their breathing slow and steady. Despite their earlier display of power, they seemed completely unfazed by the ordeal, as if protecting Maria was just another day's work. As the miles stretched on, Maria allowed herself a moment to process what had happened. It wasn't the first time she'd faced danger on the road. Long-haul trucking came with its share of risks. But this encounter had been different. These men hadn't just been reckless drivers or rude passers-by. They had deliberately targeted her, using intimidation and aggression to assert dominance. Their actions weren't random, they were calculated, meant to strip away her confidence and make her feel powerless. But instead of breaking her, their behavior had only strengthened her resolve. And thanks to Max and Luna, she had turned the tables in a way none of them could have anticipated. Still, Maria knew better than to let her guard down completely. While the immediate threat was gone, she couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't over yet. The desert highway ahead was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every sound, the hum of her engine, the crunch of gravel beneath her tires, seem unnaturally loud. She kept one hand firmly on the steering wheel while occasionally glancing in her rearview mirror, half expecting to see the bikers reappear in pursuit. But the road behind her remained empty, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight. About an hour later, Maria spotted a small roadside diner up ahead. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting a soft red and blue glow across the cracked asphalt parking lot. Though she rarely stopped at such places, especially late at night. Something about the sight of it drew her in. Maybe it was the promise of warmth after hours of tension, or maybe it was the need to ensure everything was truly okay before continuing her journey. Whatever the reason, she decided to pull over. The diner was nearly deserted when Maria walked in, with only a few patrons scattered around the room. A tired-looking waitress stood behind the counter, wiping down coffee mugs with a dish rag. The air smelled faintly of grease and burnt toast, but to Maria, it was comforting, a reminder of simpler times. She ordered a cup of black coffee and found a seat near the window where she could keep an eye on her truck and her dogs inside the cab. Max and Luna were visible through the glass, their silhouettes unmistakable even in the dim light. They watched her intently, their loyalty unwavering. While waiting for her coffee, Maria pulled out her phone to check for cell reception. To her relief, there was a single bar of signal, enough to make a call, though not enough to browse the internet or send photos. She dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher as calmly as possible. "I was harassed by a group of motorcyclists earlier tonight," she said. "They forced me off the highway and surrounded me in a clearing. My dog stepped in and I managed to scare them off, but I wanted to report the incident in case they try something like this again." The dispatcher assured her that local law enforcement would look into the matter, though Maria wasn't holding her breath. In areas like this, where resources were limited and crimes often went unreported, finding the bikers might prove difficult. Still, reporting the incident felt like the right thing to do. If nothing else, it gave authorities a heads up about potential troublemakers in the area. As she sipped her coffee, Maria noticed the waitress hovering nearby, clearly curious about the woman sitting alone in the middle of the night. Finally, the older woman approached, setting a fresh pot of creamer on the table. "You okay, hun?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "You look like you've had quite the evening." Maria hesitated, unsure how much to share. But there was something disarming about the waitress's genuine kindness, so she decided to open up, at least partially. "Let's just say I ran into some trouble on the road," she replied with a wry smile. "Nothing I couldn't handle, though." The waitress nodded knowingly, as if she'd heard similar stories before. "Out here, you never know who, or what you're gonna run into," she said. "But it sounds like you handled yourself just fine." She gestured toward the window, where Max and Luna were still visible. "Those your pups? They're beautiful." Maria followed her gaze and smiled softly. "Yeah, they're mine," she said. "Their trained military K9s saved my life more times than I can count." The waitress raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Well, I'll be darned," she muttered. "No wonder those boys didn't stick around. Anyone dumb enough to mess with you and those dogs deserves what they got." Maria chuckled lightly, grateful for the stranger's unexpected support. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, letting the weight of the evening slip away. Conversations like this reminded her why she loved the road, not because of the dangers or challenges, but because of the people she met along the way. Some were kind, others were indifferent, but all of them added color to her journey. After finishing her coffee, Maria thanked the waitress and headed back to her truck. As she climbed into the cab, Max and Luna greeted her enthusiastically, wagging their tails and nudging her hands for attention. She scratched behind their ears affectionately, murmuring words of praise. "You two are amazing, you know that?" she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." With renewed energy, Maria merged back, onto the highway, the rhythmic hum of her engine lulling her into a sense of calm. The rest of the drive passed without incident, the vast expanse of desert stretching endlessly before her. By the time she reached her destination, a modest truck stopped just outside Las Vegas. It was well past midnight. Exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but she resisted the urge to sleep immediately. Instead, she parked her rig in a secure spot, checked on Max and Luna one last time, and jotted down notes about the evening's events in a small journal she kept, tucked under her seat. Writing had always been a form of therapy for Maria, a way to process her thoughts and emotions. As she scribbled details about the confrontation with the bikers, she realized something important. She wasn't afraid anymore. Sure, the experience had been terrifying, but it had also reinforced her belief in her own strength and in the bond she shared with Max and Luna. Together, they formed a team capable of overcoming almost anything. Before settling in for the night, Maria stepped outside to stretch her legs and breathe in the cool desert air. The stars above twinkled brightly, their light undimmed by city pollution. Out here, far from the noise and chaos of civilization, Maria felt a profound sense of peace. Life on the road wasn't easy, but it was hers, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Back inside the cab, she curled up on the narrow bench seat, pulling a blanket over herself as Max and Luna settled in beside her. Their warmth was comforting, a reminder that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never face them alone. With that thought, Maria closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, the steady hum of her truck's engine lulling her into dreams of open roads and endless possibilities. And so, another chapter of Maria's journey came to an end. But as any seasoned traveler knows, the road is full of surprises, and tomorrow promised to bring new adventures, new lessons, and perhaps even new dangers. Whatever awaited her, Maria was ready. After all, she had Max and Luna by her side, and that made all the difference. The next morning, Maria woke up to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the windshield of her truck. The desert air was crisp and cool, a welcome contrast to the heat that would inevitably build as the day wore on. She stretched carefully, mindful of Max and Luna, who were still curled up beside her. Both dogs stirred at her movement, their ears perking up as they sensed her waking. Within moments, they were wide awake, their tails wagging in greeting. Maria smiled at them, scratching behind their ears before climbing out of the cab to start her day. She always began mornings like this with a routine, checking her rig for any signs of damage or issues, refilling water bottles for herself and the dogs, and grabbing a quick breakfast from whatever diner or gas station was nearby. This time, however, her mind kept drifting back to the events of the previous night. The memory of the biker's aggressive behavior lingered in the corners of her thoughts, but so did the pride she felt in how she and her dogs had handled the situation. After ensuring her truck was in good condition, Maria decided it was time to follow up on her 911 call. She walked over to the truck stop's small office where a payphone hung on the wall, a relic of a bygone era, but one that still worked when cell signals failed. Inserting a few coins, she dialed the local sheriff's department, hoping to provide more details about the incident. To her surprise, a deputy answered almost immediately, sounding attentive and professional. "Ma'am, we received your report last night," the deputy said after Maria introduced herself. "We're actively looking into it. Did you happen to get any identifying information about the bikers? License plates, tattoos, anything like that?" Maria thought back to the chaotic scene in the clearing. While she hadn't been able to see license plates clearly, she remembered certain details. The biker leader's mirrored sunglasses, the distinctive skull emblem on his leather jacket, and the way one of the others had a snake tattoo coiled around his forearm. She relayed all of this to the deputy, who took careful notes. "We'll do our best to track them down," he assured her. "These kinds of groups tend to stick together, so if we find one, we might be able to locate the rest. In the meantime, stay safe out there. If you run into trouble again, don't hesitate to call us directly." Hanging up the phone, Maria felt a flicker of hope. She knew better than to expect miracles. Law enforcement in rural areas often faced overwhelming challenges, but she appreciated the deputy's willingness to take her seriously. It wasn't always easy being a woman on the road, especially when reporting incidents involving men who thrived on intimidation. Too often, victims were dismissed or told to simply avoid conflict. But this time, someone was listening. With the call finished, Maria returned to her truck where Max and Luna greeted her enthusiastically. She loaded them into the cab, gave them each a treat for their bravery during the previous night's ordeal, and hit the road once more. Her destination for the day was a delivery point several hours away, deep in the heart of Nevada. As she drove, she allowed herself to reflect on the broader implications of what had happened. Maria had always known that life as a female truck driver came with its own set of challenges. From condescending remarks at way stations to outright sexism from fellow drivers, she'd encountered plenty of obstacles along the way. But those experiences had only strengthened her resolve to prove herself, not just as a capable driver, but as someone who refused to let fear dictate her choices. Last night's confrontation with the bikers had been a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in her profession, but it had also reinforced her belief in her ability to handle whatever came her way. What struck Maria most, though, was the role Max and Luna had played in turning the tide. Without their intervention, the outcome could have been very different. Their presence wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. They represented everything Maria valued: loyalty, courage, and an unwavering commitment to protecting what mattered most. And while she didn't need validation from anyone else, knowing that her dogs had single-handedly intimidated a group of armed men filled her with a quiet sense of triumph. As the miles rolled by, Maria found herself thinking about the ripple effects of the incident. Word of what had happened would likely spread among other truckers, particularly those who frequented the same routes. Stories traveled quickly in the tight-knit community of long-haul drivers, often passed along during brief encounters at rest stops or truck stops. Maria wondered how her story would be retold, whether it would inspire others to stand their ground or serve as a cautionary tale about the risks of underestimating someone with military-trained dogs. Her musings were interrupted when she pulled into a busy truck stop later that afternoon. The place buzzed with activity. Trucks lined up side by side as drivers fueled up, ate meals, or rested briefly before continuing their journeys. Maria parked her rig near the edge of the lot, giving Max and Luna enough space to stretch their legs while she grabbed lunch from the attached diner. Inside, she recognized a few familiar faces, fellow truckers she'd crossed paths with over the years. One of them, a burly man named Hank, waved her over to his table. "Hey, Maria," he called out, his voice carrying over the din of conversation. "Heard you ran into some trouble last night. You okay?" Maria blinked in surprise. News really did travel fast. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "How'd you hear about that?" Hank grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Word gets around. Some guy at the counter earlier said he saw a pack of bikers tearing out of the desert like their tails were on fire. When I asked around, turns out everyone's talking about the lady trucker with the guard dog army. That's gotta be you, right?" Maria laughed despite herself, shaking her head. "It wasn't an army, just two very well-trained dogs." "Well, whatever it was, it sounds like you showed those jerks who's boss," Hank said approvingly. "Good for you. We need more people like you out here, strong, smart, and not afraid to fight back." His words warmed her, even as she shrugged off the compliment. "I didn't do much," she admitted. "Max and Luna did all the work," Hank chuckled, glancing toward the window where Maria's truck was visible. "Still counts. Those dogs are lucky to have you, and vice versa. Anyway, I figured I'd mention it because word's spreading. A lot of folks are saying they want to keep an eye out for those bikers in case they try anything else. You've got allies out here, Maria. Don't forget that." Touched by his sincerity, Maria thanked him before returning to her own meal. As she ate, she noticed several other drivers casting curious glances her way, whispering among themselves. While part of her wished for anonymity, another part felt grateful for the camaraderie. Trucking might be a solitary profession, but moments like this reminded her that she was never truly alone. Later that evening, as Maria neared her delivery point, she spotted a police cruiser parked along the side of the highway. Two officers stood beside it, speaking with a group of motorcyclists whose bikes matched the description of the ones she'd encountered the previous night. Her heart skipped a beat as she slowed her truck to a crawl, watching the scene unfold. One of the officers glanced up, noticing her rig, and gestured for her to pull over. Maria complied, rolling down her window as the officer approached. "Are you Maria Rodriguez?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "Yes, sir," she replied, her pulse quickening. "We've been trying to locate you," the officer explained. "These gentlemen were identified as part of the group involved in last night's incident. We'd like to ask you a few questions if you're willing." Maria nodded. stepping out of her truck to join the conversation. With Max and Luna standing protectively beside her, she recounted the events of the previous night, providing as many details as she could remember. The bikers avoided her gaze, their earlier bravado replaced by sullen silence. By the time she finished speaking, the officers had gathered enough evidence to detain the group for further questioning. As the bikers were led away, one of the officers turned to Maria with a respectful nod. "Thank you for coming forward," he said. "Your testimony makes a big difference. Hopefully this will send a message to others who think they can harass drivers like this." Maria shook his hand, feeling a rare sense of closure. Justice might not always be swift, but in this case it felt satisfyingly tangible. Driving away from the scene, she couldn't help but smile. The road ahead was still unpredictable, but for now she felt a renewed sense of safety and purpose. Back in her cab, Max and Luna settled into their usual spots, content and calm. Maria reached over to pat their heads, her gratitude overflowing. Together, they had faced danger and emerged stronger for it. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Maria knew one thing for certain. No matter where the road took her next, she and her loyal companions would face it head-on, with courage, determination, and an unbreakable bond. The days that followed the confrontation with the bikers passed in a blur of highways, rest stops, and deliveries. Maria's routine returned to normal, or as normal as life on the road could ever be. But the memory of that night lingered like a shadow, one she didn't mind carrying. It wasn't just the danger or the adrenaline rush that stayed with her. It was the reminder of how resilience and teamwork could turn even the most daunting situations into victories. Word of her encounter spread quickly among truckers, thanks to Hank and others who admired her courage. At first, Maria tried to downplay the story when people brought it up, brushing off their praise with modesty. "It wasn't me. It was Max and Luna," she'd say, patting the dogs affectionately. But eventually she realized something important. Sharing her experience wasn't about seeking recognition. It was about inspiring others. Fellow drivers began calling her the Guardian of the Road, a nickname that made her chuckle but also filled her with pride. For many, her story became a symbol of strength, a testament to standing your ground no matter the odds. As weeks turned into months, Maria noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted with her. Gas station attendants greeted her warmly, remembering her from previous visits. Other truckers tipped their hats or honked respectfully as they passed her rig on the highway. Even law enforcement officers seemed to treat her with extra courtesy, likely aware of her reputation. While Maria appreciated the respect, she remained grounded. She knew better than to let fame or whatever this was go to her head. Life on the road demanded humility above all else. One evening, several months after the incident, Maria stopped at a popular truck stop known for its lively atmosphere. The parking lot buzzed with activity. Trucks lined up row after row as drivers gathered around picnic tables, swapping stories over cups of coffee and plates of greasy food. Maria decided to join them, curious to hear what tales were circulating tonight. As she approached, one of the men spotted her and waved her over enthusiastically. "Hey, look who's here," he exclaimed, drawing attention from the group. "It's Maria, the Guardian herself." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd as everyone turned to greet her. Some she recognized, while others were strangers eager to meet the woman, whose name had become synonymous with bravery. They welcomed her warmly, making space for her at their table. Max and Luna, sensing the friendly vibe, stretched out comfortably by her feet, earning pats and scratches from admirers. "So, tell us again," one of the younger drivers said, leaning forward eagerly. "What happened out there? I've heard bits and pieces, but I want the full story." Maria hesitated, unsure if she wanted to relive the moment yet again. But then she saw the genuine curiosity in their faces, the kind of interest that came not from gossip, but from admiration, and decided to share. As she recounted the events of that fateful night, the group listened intently, hanging on to every word. When she described how Max and Luna sprang into action, The room erupted in cheers and laughter. "That's incredible," another driver exclaimed. "I always knew having dogs on the road was smart, but military-trained ones? That's next-level stuff." The conversation shifted naturally to other topics, with each person sharing their own close calls or memorable moments on the road. Someone talked about surviving a blizzard in Wyoming, while another recounted narrowly avoiding a collision during a thunderstorm. Through it all, Maria found herself smiling, not because of her own story, but because of the camaraderie these shared experiences fostered. In a profession often marked by solitude, nights like this reminded her why she loved being part of the trucking community. Eventually, the gathering broke up, and Maria returned to her truck. As she settled back into the cab with Max and Luna, she reflected on how much things had changed since joining the Army years ago. Back then, she'd been searching for purpose, for a way to channel her determination into something meaningful. Now, sitting behind the wheel of her rig with two loyal companions by her side, she realized she'd found exactly that. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had shaped her into someone capable of handling whatever challenges came her way. The following morning, Maria received an unexpected message on her CB radio while driving through Utah. A dispatcher informed her that local authorities had officially charged the bikers involved in the harassment incident. Surveillance footage from nearby gas stations had helped identify several members of the group, leading to arrests. The news brought a sense of closure Maria hadn't realized she needed. Justice might be slow, but it felt good to know that accountability existed, even in the vast expanse of open highways. That afternoon, Maria pulled over at a scenic overlook to take in the view. The landscape stretched endlessly before her, rugged mountains giving way to golden plains bathed in sunlight. Max and Luna hopped out of the cab to stretch their legs, bounding happily across the grass. Maria leaned against the hood of her truck, watching them play and feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was freedom, pure and simple, the kind that came from knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be. Later that evening, as she drove under a canopy of stars, Maria thought about the future. There would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead, more stretches of loneliness and moments of fear. But she also knew she wouldn't face them alone. Max and Luna were her constants, her partners in every sense of the word. Together, they formed a team built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. And as long as they were together, nothing truly daunting could stand in their way. By the time she reached her next delivery point, Maria felt lighter, as if shedding the weight of lingering doubts. She completed her paperwork efficiently, exchanged pleasantries with the warehouse staff, and climbed back into her truck, ready to tackle the next leg of her journey. The road called to her, promising new adventures and discoveries. Each marker represented not just distance traveled, but growth earned. As the sun rose over the horizon the next day, casting a warm glow across the desert, Maria smiled to herself. She thought about the nickname people had given her, the guardian of the road. While she didn't consider herself a hero, she understood the sentiment behind it. To those who looked up to her, she represented strength, resilience, and the power of standing up for oneself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Max barked softly from the passenger seat, snapping her out of her thoughts. Luna joined in, wagging her tail expectantly. Maria chuckled, scratching both dogs behind their ears. "All right, my brave ones," she said, her voice filled with affection. "Let's see what today has in store for us." With that, she shifted gears and merged onto the highway, the hum of her engine blending seamlessly with the rhythm of the open road. Ahead lay countless possibilities, each one waiting to unfold beneath the endless sky. Whatever challenges awaited, Maria was ready. After all, she had Max and Luna by her side, and together they were unstoppable.